This is Metropole Television. This is your economic review, but most certainly you're watching a Business AM. My name is Simbalaji Charles. Get involved 21446. That's your SMS line at Metropole TVKE across all your social media platforms. Let's get started now. Let's turn our attention to the political front in Nairobi County, where the High Court temporarily stopped the swearing-in of Nairobi Deputy Governor Anna Kananu as the Governor of Nairobi City County. Now, this is pending the hearing of a petition that has been filed by the Law Society of Kenya and the Kenya Human Rights Commission. Now, the court order came even after Kananu took over from the Nairobi County Assembly Speaker Benson Mutura, who was holding the position of governor in acting capacity for 60 days to pave way for the by-election to elect a substantive governor. Debate is raging on the legal circles over the latest moves orchestrated by Nairobi County Assembly to put in place a substantive governor. This morning, therefore, to help us pretty much understand where we are in terms of this, we're joined by Collins Lodge, who's especially going to tell us what is this move and how do we read into it. Collins, now let's ask this question now. Is this recent move in contravention of the Constitution of Kenya? Let's begin from there.
Thank you so much, Charles, for this. Right from the onset, this is a violation of the Constitution. What the Constitution actually and the County Government Act dictate is that should there be a vacancy in the position of the governor, then the deputy governor should take over. Should there also be a vacancy in the position of deputy governor, then the speaker should take over in an acting capacity for a period of 60 days until culmination of by-elections. That's what happened in Nairobi. But to backdate the application of the law, that is the mischief here. But let us look at it objective manner.
Yes.
Exit Mike Sonko through an impeachment, and at the time under which Sonko was being impeached, there was no substantive governor, but there was already a letter to the effect of appointment of one Kananu to be the deputy governor. This did not sail through because there was a petition to court, and so at the time that vacancy was created at the position of governor, there was no office holder in the position, rather in the office of deputy governor. And so that affected that. We skip that part. But now, those bottlenecks that are removed, but they've been removed when the appointing authority of the deputy governor has vacated office. Yes. And so, for the deputy governor actually to even be vetted, and that formal letter that is appointing the deputy governor ought to be signed by the governor, but that is now missing. But what are we looking at? We are looking at a mischief under which we are assuming that every threshold was held constant, that the governor was still in office as at the time he was appointing Kananu, and so the MPs can go ahead and still vet Kananu as they did, and to have her as a elected deputy governor. But then what is entertaining is that there's a letter that resurfaced to the effect that Mike Sonko had already withdrawn the appointment of the deputy governor to that position. And so we are looking at situations whereby we had an office holder in the position of governor who did not really understand what he was doing as at the time he was acting, and so these things have come back to bite him. But to be objective, that cannot happen. Retrogressive application of the law cannot happen, and the best of it is an illegality. And I think what LSK is trying to do is actually to stop this.
Yes.
But you have to read beyond this. Who does it serve for us not to? When Mutura was the acting governor, within that time, I think immediately when he was acting governor, there's a lot of fancy and so that's the issue. Therein lies the interest of whosoever is bringing all this, whosoever is doing this feature and whosoever is playing the cards around here. But to look at it objectively, it's purely an illegality.
Yes. All right. Now, let's look at it another way, Collins, that I really want to ask you. Now, the people saying that there is no problem in finding loopholes in a law and then find ways to actually go around it? Does it still become illegal if within that law you can still find ways of sort of flexing your muscle in it? And what does it mean now for the next by-election that we're waiting for in Aruba County? That is, again, say that we put it on a hold now that we have now that we have a governor in that capacity?
Charles, there are two forms of law.
Yes.
There is procedural law,
yes,
and there is substantive law. If there is a breach or an oversight on the substantive law, you cannot remedy it. Whatever thing you're doing is an illegality. From the face of it, ab initio, it's an illegality. There's nothing you can cure to that illegality. But if it's with regard to procedures, the law is somehow lenient. There are things that we can go back, redraft, and see how we can make things happen.
Yes.
For instance, you remember when we were talking about transfer of functions from Nairobi County to county government, the court, Justice Wasilwa, held that was an illegality because of lack of public participation as a procedure. And what she ruled was that she mandated Nairobi County government together with the executive to go back and see how they enhance this participation. They did that so that they can be able to clear that illegality that was situated by not following the procedures. So in this case, equally, I think this is just a procedural defect that needs to be amalgamated. But there's a 3-judge bench that has been proposed to be formed to listen to this matter.
Yes.
So as it stands now, I think the position under which the IEBC is to continue preparing for the by-elections that was slated for 18th February until the matter has been determined and heard. Because if the matter is heard in favor of IEBC, I'll tell you, elections will still be held in 18th unless something else comes from the courts, of which I think they would not want to again suffer another loss to Anne Kananu, because Anne Kananu can equally still sue and say of a legitimate expectation because she was expecting to be appointed as deputy governor. So to prevent that over litigation in the courts, I think it will be our best interest, looking at elections approaching in 2022. Really, we're just down 1 year.
Yes.
To be of the best interest, even of the country and of the county government, to let the acting deputy governor, whose legality we are questioning, to finish the term.
Pretty much. All right. Now let's look at it that way, therefore, Collins, because the way you've ended it is one other talking point now for becomes: is this just a political muscle expression between what we do know now is the two fronts that we do have as we gun force for 2022? Is it just a representation of who is playing better cards than who? Yes, Collins, I want to get your view, because you've completed your sentiment on would rather just let her complete her term in 2022. That would be in the best interest. But then a question would be, would that now appointment be also an indication of the political force or the struggle that we've seen as we move forward to 2022, and most importantly, between the president and the VP?
The most unfortunate thing under all this, Charles, is that we are sacrificing the rule of law under the altar of political expedient decisions.
Yes.
I mean, at no point should we blind our eyes to the regulations of the law so that we can serve political masters. But that is the unfortunate situation that you're finding ourselves in. Remember, even the law is politically engineered. And so a lot of things that are happening within our ecosystem and within our existence now are really much politically engineered. Your question. We know their interest in Nairobi, and there are factions that want to try their muscles in Nairobi in preparing for 2022. That's why you will see the kind of litigations that are arising. They are sponsored actually from these political people. I'm not saying LSK is anyway political, but really, faction in seeing a by-election. And the faction from the president would not be interested in seeing a by-election.
Yes.
But what would the residents of the Nairobi County be interested in? I think for us now, it is seeing how resources are getting to the people. If NMS is delivering illegality, the Nairobian voter does not care for that. Nairobian voter wants to see this delivery. They do not care whether by-elections are going to be in 18. If you look at the history of this country, elections are the worst performed activities in regards to public participation. People really shy off out of by-elections. So really, you're not going to tell me the will of the people of Nairobi are going to be expressed through by-election. Not really.
Pretty much, I beg that we move on to the next issue this morning. And this one, I'm going to bring in Reginald Kazitsu, who's going to help us understand exactly where we are. And that's the big elephant in the room as we even start 2021. Debt. Now, China has indicated that it's ready to suspend Kenya's debt nearly a week after the country received a debt reprieve from the Paris Club of International Creditors. Now, this follows a request by Kenya for its debt obligations to be temporarily suspended to allow the economy to recover from the negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, according to a report by Kenyan's CEO, Chinese embassy spokesperson Wang Yakin has said that Beijing would accede to a debt relief request from Nairobi to strengthen a coordination. Now, so far, China has suspended 12 African countries, making it the country that has signed suspension agreements with the highest number of countries. Now, Kenya owes China more than 725 billion shillings in bilateral debt, with a total debt in the country expected to cross 10 trillion shillings mark. On Monday, January 11th, the Paris Club of International Creditors announced that they had granted Kenya a 6-month debt suspension. Now, the country filed for debt service suspension initiative (DSSI) to the international creditor, citing several reasons, including the COVID-19 pandemic that has ravaged the economy. Now, 12 countries agreed to move the grant the country the move and more time to service their 69 billion shillings in debt. Now, the country include Australia, Austria, Brazil, Finland, Ireland, Israel, the Netherlands, Norway, the Russian Federation, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. That is the history. Now, we begin, therefore, with this question. What could be behind the recent turnaround from the Treasury Office to seek the debt relief after previously having a tough stance on how this was going to affect the country's credit rating? Reginald, that's exactly where we start from this morning.
Hi, Simba.
Good morning.
The answer to that is simple. They are broke. Simple, straightforward answer. You don't ask for relief if you are not able to pay.
Yes, but but Reginald, did we know that we were broke last year when we were saying no to this DSSI?
The politics at play here,
Yes.
when they were saying no at that point in time, they had not gone after IMF to ask IMF for money, because we know in February they're expecting 2.3 billion from IMF. Multilateral loans or concessional loans that the sales treasury likes to pound about, they're cheap in terms of interest rate, but in terms of policy direction that they expect. So number one thing that they were asked to do is to revert revenue generation to where it was. That's why all tax measures came back in January. That's purely, and the president hinted at something like that when he said foreigners, but when you to survive from them, then they will determine how the sovereign operates.
Yes.
So if he's asking for debt relief, definitely is a push coming from IMF. To pay, they found money to pay. The issue also that is there,
yes,
is Kenya's ability to go back to the Eurobond market going back to the Eurobond market to borrow to pay.
Yes.
That market is as good as shut for Kenya right now, and they just had to now bow to IMF and get relief. 2.3 billion from IMF in February, and all the things now came with that are some of the things we are seeing now.
All right, Reginald, let me just take you back to exactly what is Kenya's debt trend to China, and I will take you back to 2015. That's when exactly we started to see this high trend of us really relying on money from China, and especially just geared towards the infrastructural projects in the country. But this is where the spanner is, Reginald. I want you to tell me exactly what this means, because now there's this fear that yes, we're going for 69B, we might get it, but then there's this spanner in that conversation, because if you look at most of the money that we're getting from China, it is under commercial agreements. Reginald, it's coming in sort of some quasi-public corporations and state-owned banks such as China Development Bank and Exim Bank of China. So we might be going for 69B, but it looks as if we might not get it fully.
So Simba,
Yes.
with China, and if the ambassador did actually say what was said in that news article,
Yes.
then again it's a debt suspension. Yeah, what Kenya actually needs is debt relief. Let's say the truth. But yes, we'll get a suspension for 6 months. What will have really changed between now and June to say now we can repay? What will have changed between now and June to say, oh, now the economy has miraculously turned around and all those things? Now, nothing will have happened in that case.
Yes.
And our major problem actually, because if you look at our current debt repayment, close to 608 or 700 billion of debt service in this financial year, it is more than the agricultural sector, infrastructure sector, and social protection put together.
Yes.
Literally. That shows you there's no development that is going to happen as long as we're paying these amounts of money. But the interesting thing that of that 687, 700 billion that we need to service this year, majority of it is actually domestic debt, which no one is talking about.
Yes.
400 and something billion is actually domestic debt. So if you get the 69 billion here, the 50 billion there, you still have a 400 and something billion debt to repay domestically. If that debt was owned by individuals, it would be brilliant, because when they pay, this money is going into the citizens, who will then use it for multiply it in purchasing things. But the majority of people that hold the bank pension funds. So it is not money that is going back to the population. So our problem is not just an external debt problem. Our problem actually is a domestic debt problem. It's over borrowing where money is not seen going to anything that is actually effective. Unproductive debt.
Yes. All right, Reginald. Now, there was this announcement, therefore, by IMF that, well, our debt, therefore, they say we include the 3.4 trillion that they want us to include, that is in terms of PPEs, loans, and county debts and all that, that if you put it together, then that was going to be 3.4 trillion, meaning that if we started by what Treasury Office was telling us, the 7T, then our debt now could be at 10.4 trillion this year in 2021. And remember, our debt ceiling was 9 trillion, which the Treasury Office was telling us that we can't touch until 2022. Now, Reginald, when we look at these headlines, therefore, and Yatani said that he has actually accepted that he's going to do that, meaning that our debt now starts at 10.4 T. Does this debt relief mean anything if our debt now is at 10.4 trillion shillings?
Just to mention that, we mentioned it together on this show before when we mentioned that the pension liability was close to 1 trillion, which
yes.
Some of us were already working with 8.2, 8.3 trillion, and we were saying our debt was close to 9. Our debt is going to be at 10.1 trillion, and not our GDP is not going to grow in 2020. It's contracting by like 1%. That means GDP will remain around at 9 trillion, 9 point something trillion. That means our debt to GDP is going to be over 100.
Yes.
Which is literally debt distress. And our worry should not even be the debt to GDP. Our worry is the debt service to revenue. Because 60% of your revenue is going to service debt. You enter into a period what we call economic stagnation, because you cannot develop, you have no funds for development. If you try to borrow again, you're going to, if you're going to borrow, 50% of whatever you're borrowing is also going to be repaying debt. So we are in an economic mess, an economic crisis that needs tough decisions and tough solutions. And I think for the incoming government in 2022, the first audit I will do is how much of the borrowing was actually went into what it was borrowed for, and how much of it is that is debt that was borrowed but was siphoned either into private pockets or into capital flight. Declaration that we are not going to pay anything that did not go into what it was supposed to be.
Yes.
And literally, if we have borrowed, Jubilee government has borrowed 8 trillion into power, then you say, of that 8 trillion, we can only trace 1 trillion or 2 trillion to SGR, which was buy one train for the price of 2. Yeah, that's the only money that we're going to repay. The rest, which we cannot trace where that money to, the public should not pay, because it's money that went into private pocket.
Reginald, important therefore. Now, let's clear this conversation before we go on a break. Now, Yatani says that we'll accept the 3.4 trillion. Good. There are plans, if we go according to sources, that they might go back to Parliament and increase our debt ceiling to 12 trillion. Reginald, if that is true, what does that mean for the country? And again, if you say that our debt ceiling is at 12 trillion, and Yatani is saying that it's going to gradually factor this 3.4 trillion into our debt profile, is that smart?
Simba, the trillion, whether there's a debt ceiling or not, they will still borrow.
Yes.
And that's the truth of the matter. So that's a figure that is neither here borrowing. It's already a debt that is there. So anyone who's analyzing, they will factor in that whole amount. And what that means is that our rating will get a hit. If they try to borrow, because this period that you are saying we are in a mess and we cannot pay. So the risk level automatically goes up. But we're in a situation where it's either increase taxes, either borrow more to get out of the mess, or either default. But the only way we can get out of this debt mess is we have to extremely grow the economy to try and repay this debt. Because if you go to the default, it will slow down the economy. If you raise taxes, it will slow down the economy. So the only way is to grow yourself out. But unfortunately, we have a lot of short-termism in our leadership, in our political leadership. So as much as people don't like BBI, I think Kenya first has a political problem before we have an economic problem. Because as long as someone knows that his term is 4 years, 5 years, their policies are going to be short-termism to make sure they get votes for the next term. So those are things that need to be cured. Because if you do not cure that, then you're never going to have long-term policies that drive growth. You're going to have short-term policies that will keep on piling up debt, and this country will remain poor.
Pretty much. Gentlemen, I beg we take a short break. Once we come back, let's talk about NSA. Now, Safaricom is 60.2% of NSA's entire wealth. Once we come back.